Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
The corpse of Karelian lies stricken on the industrial wasteland of Britain. Great British brands like Tarmac and McAlpines have been trashed. Tens of thousands of jobs are in danger. Thousands of small businesses are owed hundreds of millions by the dead company, causing the danger of a chain of industrial disasters.
At root, this is an ideological question. Carillion grew out of the privatization mania, started by Mrs Thatcher, embraced fanatically in the Tony Blair, Gordon Brown ethos.
Public bad, private good, said the pig to the man and the man to the pig, until none could tell which were the pigs and which were the men, with apologies to George Orwell. Our guest, Professor Rudi Klein, is an expert in the construction industry, and he's a barrister too. He's CEO of the Specialist Engineering Contractors SEC, and he joins us now. Professor, thanks for coming on the Sputnik. For those who've been away, just tell us the scale of the Karelian disaster, would you?
Yeah, it's so difficult to estimate at the moment. I mean, everyone would say it's massive. We've never seen anything like it before. The company probably owes somewhere in the region of about £2 billion to all its subcontractors and suppliers. But the position is complicated by the fact you've got different layers of subcontractors. You've got, subcontractors, you've got subcontractors, and then you've got subcontractors. So the ripple effects are going to be going on for some time. But in all of this, you've got, as you go down the supply chain, the people that are going to be worst affected are small businesses. They're all SMEs, but you can get some businesses like quite large SMEs will lose. I mean, I've got one figure, 4 million I just heard this morning, one company. But even for a small company, I've come across one in Northern Ireland the last couple of days, a very small company doing work, probably employing no more than 5 or 6 people. They're losing 150,000. And for them, that is obviously just as bad.
I listened to a man today who's owed £1 million by Carillion. Yeah. He had 50 workers. He's had to lay off 10 already, and he thinks it may go worse than that. Because most of these SMEs simply can't trade their way out of a loss of £1 million.
No, they can't, and the trouble is at the moment it's very difficult for them, of course, also to speak publicly about this. I've been trying to get people to do it, but
why?
The reason why is because as soon as you say, declare your weakness. Look, I've been here.
And the banks close in.
The banks close in. Their customers close in. Their suppliers close in. So you kind of keep it to your chest. You'll see in the next couple of weeks. You'll get a sense of the consequences, the job consequences of this. But that could even take a year, 2 years to come through, because in fact, initially firms will be fighting to survive and trying to keep as many jobs on. And then as time goes on, they'll be scratching around for work to try and keep their people in work. But then it might be 6 months down the road, they find they can't get the resources, and that's it. So we really won't know the full scale of this massive business disaster until probably a year's time, maybe even more.
I read somewhere, if I understand correctly, a school somewhere in the north of England. Its school dinners is going to be served by firefighters.
Yeah, the fire brigade have been put on notice to serve school dinners. See, we think of Carillion as a construction company.
So what has it got to do with
what are they doing, serving school dinners or not?
Well, first of all, let me just say that Carillion was a finance company. They manipulated the finances of their supply chain. They had no assets to speak of. So I wouldn't even give them the name construction company because everything was outsourced. to the supply chain. And what they did, that was their model, that was the business model. And so what they did was also, anything they grabbed, any work they could grab, they grabbed it. So it could be construction, on one hand, big infrastructure projects, and then catering, cleaning, facilities management, building maintenance, but they weren't doing it. Everything was sublet, and then sublet onwards. They did not, do any of the work themselves. They used the cash that was intended for the supply chain. So the cash was coming down for their customers and clients. They kept for as long as they could. I mean, 120 days, whatever, they kept that cash. But when we talk about whether or not we could describe them as a construction company, I would say they were about grabbing whatever work came their way. They were rapacious. And usually at the lowest price, they would put in as low a price as possible and then bang down the prices down the supply chain. And they would take everything. And it didn't matter whether it was big infrastructure works on one hand. I mean, they were involved in the Qatar... HS2, of course, yeah. Qatar World Cup facilities. And down to just doing the catering in the schools that you're describing. And it is everything, anything. But what I've never really understood about this is that with the people, with the public bodies, the public sector bodies who actually let this work to Karelian, why would you bother to lump all these contracts into one big contract, hand it over to this company when they're perfectly good businesses, regionally, across the country, who could actually have done this work themselves?
How and why did governments hand these mega contracts to what was essentially an Uber-type operation with a phone somewhere?
Well, yes, I simply cannot get my head around that. It's a good question. It's a question that everybody's asking, of course. The government have been asked now time and time again, why? Because personally, if you're going to let work to a builder, whatever, I mean, and you knew that builder was insolvent, you wouldn't let the work to them, obviously. But they were, so it is a good question. So why would you do it? I think there are probably two reasons. I think the first reason is this, that in the minds of a lot of these clients, particularly these public sector clients, it was simply the fact that they'd used Karelian in the past. Karelian was known to do this type of work. There was this kind of brand association with Karelian being all singing, all dancing type of organisation. And, well, let's play slave. They know what they do. We'll give it to them. The fact, all right, they might be a bit dodgy today. They might turn things around tomorrow, And while the banks are supporting them, then that's fine. Yeah.
With these profit warnings, three profit warnings they had, didn't that ring a bell anywhere in the British state?
Big bets being made?
Well, yes.
Yes, people betting on the stock market,
that's
on their demise?
Absolutely. I mean, they're the most sort of heavily betted on company, I think, in the construction industry. I mean, this was known. I mean, those profit warnings, actually, even before those profit warnings happened, everybody who was in the know knew this company was in a problem, was having problems. 5 or 6 years ago, they were selling off their offices around the country and then leasing them back because they were needing the cash. In autumn 2012, Cameron announced something called the Supply Chain Finance facility. Now, what this facility was, it said, Cameron said at the time, look, I tell you what, we're going to help small businesses. If they pay a fee, they can get their money earlier. So what Karelian did, it had 65 days. That was the standard payment term, 65 days. And then, but the fact is they couldn't even pay their supply chains, even with that. So what they did, Cameron's announcement was a lifeline. They put the 65 days out to 120 days. And then they said to their suppliers, right, you want your money earlier? You pay a fee. So pay to get paid. And so if you want your money, and the earlier you want it, the higher the fee you pay. And an absolute scam. It's just absolutely appalling.
It's a Ponzi scheme, really.
It's a Ponzi scheme, yes. Yeah. But the thing is, George, it was just a reflection of the fact they could not directly pay their supply chain. So they got the bank to pay the money. And of course, obviously, the bank then they're able to use the cash in the meantime for over 4 months, and then of course the bank then will come back and claim what they've already paid out to the suppliers. And of course, I think the banks are still owed money for that arrangement. But even with all of that, I think most people would be surprised though at the treatment of their supply chain. I've been having texts and emails saying the bully's gone. Thank God for that. You know this, and that was the perception of Karelian right throughout the construction as a bully, and they used to hold money back. They used to find reasons for holding money back, and if you got 120-day payments, what they used to, on the 119th day, they used to say, "Oh, by the way, we're going to pay you less than what we originally said." So they might have said, you know, a couple of months or 3 months beforehand, we're going to pay you X. Come to the 119th day, by the way, can't pay you that now, have to pay you less. And they were, the firms in the supply chain, you might think, well, why did they work for them?
Unbelievable.
But first of all, they often had nowhere to go, but they were bullied, and there's a climate of fear in the construction industry that nobody seems to appreciate.
Let's come back to that industry. I mentioned earlier some of the great British brands that were, as it were, blancmanged into Carillion. I worked for two of them. I worked for Tarmac and McAlpine.
Right.
These were industrial giants. They were part of our national heritage. Why did all these companies agree to merge themselves in what now turns out to be a Ponzi scheme?
Well, the simple reason was, unfortunately, in recent years, we've come to a position where a lot of these firms, these large companies, and it's not just even now, there's other companies, where these large companies, their capitalization was poor. Now, when you're in a situation where your capitalization is very poor, as they were, and then you hit, as Karelian did, you hit contracts, you go in lowest price, as often you do, and you hit contracts that then lose you money. You only need 2 or 3 contracts to hit you hard, as happened obviously with Carillion. And you simply, because you're so undercapitalized, you haven't got the wherewithal then to deal with that process. Now, there is, you may well have been aware that the Financial Conduct Authority is now looking into the actions of these directors. And it could well emerge, I mean, I can't say at this stage, obviously, what might emerge, but it could well emerge that there was some fraudulent trading going on. I mean, what we do know, and what commentators have been saying, financial analysts have been saying, I'm no accountant, but that their accounts were misrepresented. And which, of course, then brings in the auditors. They will be brought into this process as well as to why they were picking this up. I mean, it almost goes back to, you know, the same problems we had with the banks, you know, when the banks were going. And, you know, I don't think the auditors were sufficiently held to account there, really. But that will... So investigations are undergoing, and that... hopefully, I hope, will actually reveal really what went on.
Well, look, it's a national scandal. It's going to run and run. This will not be the last time you're on TV, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us on the Sputnik.
After the break, expect the unexpected. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Sputnik. It is a given that soldiers are marched off to war with straw hats and trumpets.
And are promised a land fit for heroes when they return. A promise more often made than honored, of course.
The American film, born on the 4th of July, about my friend Ron Kovic and starring Tom Cruise, showed the grisly reality stateside.
And here in Britain, any visit to Her Majesty's prisons, to the cold pavements of the homeless, and to the mental health system would show the grossly disproportionate presence of ex-service personnel in all 3.
I've known our next guest for nearly 30 years. He's a bête noire of the left, though even if he spoke French, he'd refuse to. He's a British nationalist, he's politically incorrect, he's a Tory, he's even a Rangers supporter. But he came to my defence when I was under attack around the time of the first Iraq War, and was early in understanding the complete madness of the second. That's because he cares for those sent into combat. That's why, though still an in-demand comedian, he spends most of his time running his charity, Care After Combat. He's the author of a book, No Further Action. He's Jim Davidson, OBE, and he joins us now. Jim, welcome to the Sputnik. How was that as an introduction?
I'm going to take you on tour, George. That was just the best. Well, it does sort of sum me up. That, you know, the big troop supporting off to war, but then, you know, listening to the words of Pink Floyd, listening to that great song by Eric Bogle, you know, The Green Fields of France, and the band play Waltzing Matilda, is to find out why they're there and helping the guys, not the political motive, to be with the guys. And I know that's why we get on.
I mean, it's lions led by donkeys, isn't it? The donkey in this question being the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, with whom you were once confused. Tell us about that.
Oh, no. Right, well, OK, I formed a charity called the British Forces Foundation, which was to try and get the big stars to go and entertain the troops for nothing. It was a time when Ben Elton had proved you could be a stand-up comedian without being funny. Sorry, Ben. And there was that people decided we're not going to entertain the troops. I remember Jack D's manager saying, we don't do anything to entertain the troops, Jim, no offence. And I could understand the political stance. And I spent all my time trying to tell these guys, look, come on, it's about the young men and women. That has changed now. But I went out to Iraq, and I've been all over the place with the armed forces. And I wrote to Tony Blair to tell him I was going to Iraq as the chairman of the British Forces Foundation, etc., etc. And he wrote back to me. He wrote letters back, handwritten, saying, we have, and I've still got them, we have found 200,000 unmarked graves, and we will be finding the weapons of mass destruction. I had my doubts, but just a lowly comedian, what do I know? And I'm not going to speak to a private in the front row. All he knows is, when's my next dinner coming through? Is the toilet been emptied? And I hope I don't get shot. So I kept it to myself. But on the day the war ended, I was with the Black Watch, well, the conflict, that bit of the second one, and I'm walking through Basra, tin hats off, me just in normal T-shirt, a guy with a gun, a camera, and an officer, and I got mobbed by these people in Basra, these kids. I'll give you an idea as well how sad it was. Mobbed by these children. I gave one $20 Kuwaiti, and he looked at it like that. Didn't know what it was. I gave him a tin of Coke, and his face lit up like a millionaire. Wow. It's fantastic to see those fantastic children. And you can't help thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen now? Now I'm being mobbed by these people cheering. I thought, well, this is taking celebrations a bit much. Surely they've not seen Big Break in Baghdad, you know. Me and John Virgo, Jimmy and Virgo. And they thought I was Tony Blair. They said, wow. Mr. Blair, what you have done for us? And I said, no, I'm not Tony Blair. And down the road, Mr. Blair, oh, Allah. I said, no, I'm not Tony Blair, I'm just a comedian. And I got so fed up with it. In the end, I thought, I'll just go along with it. Yeah, I'll be out of here in a minute. Yeah. So I was going, thank you very much. My pleasure, you know, vote Labour, all the best. Don't speak to that awful George, I don't trust him. You know, and I thought, I'm going to get assassinated here in a minute. Could have been a Conservative hiding amongst them with a gun. And so I wrote to him and I said, dear Mr. Blair, you'll be pleased to know that people thought I was you. And he wrote back, he said, well, if I ever need a body double, you're my man. Oh, my God. But then he wrote to me and said, I've bumped into Brian Adams, singer, and he said he would do a show for us in Iraq. Would your team like to take it on and put it on? And I said, sure, Mr. Blair, but surely not behind the wire, not just for the military. I said, because what would we be celebrating? The children out there don't know what money is. There's no sanitation. There's illness everywhere. There was people outside our barracks that were electrocuted while I was there by trying to dig up the copper electricity cables so they could sell it for money. Yeah. They got no food. We were handing them out food. It was inside behind the wire is all us, and outside the wire is biblical. And I said, what would we be celebrating, Mr. Blair? And that was the last letter I ever got from him. He never wrote back, as they say.
I'm sure that's right. We have prior examples of that with an ex-father of a slain soldier from Basra, just recently on the Sputnik. You were amongst the first to come to that conclusion. What was all this for?
Yeah.
And you were the first to be, one of the first in your line of work, to be sceptical about these weapons of mass destruction, which we now know to have been a monumental lie. And yet, the same Mr. Blair, maybe it was because you were his body double, he gave you the OBE, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. But there's a story to that as well. I used to have a sound company. We put on PA systems for rock and roll. And we got rid of the building ages ago and it laid empty. And I just went round there one day to pick up the post about 6 months later. And there, lying on the mat like that with the electricity bills and letters from Liz Hurley. Stop stalking me. and I wish. And it was, would you like the OBE? Please write back by this date. And the date was the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, so well, shall we give him an OBE? Post it to somewhere where he won't get it. So I got the... And I'm very proud to have it.
Yeah.
I thought of my old father. He'd have been proud, you know.
Well, he was a Brigton man, so
he was a Brigton,
red, white,
Glaswegian,
blue.
yeah.
But you've got a Glaswegian father, but you couldn't be more Cockney, really, could you?
Well, he was in the Royal Artillery, so I was born in Woolwich. He met my mother.
Okay.
My mum was Irish. She came over when she was 8 from Cork. She was an Irish Catholic. Dad was a blue-nosed Protestant, by the way, right? For Brighton. I didn't talk much too. And he drank for Scotland. He was a real... I think he played the part, George, of those grisly Glaswegians, you know. Right, you in some trouble, son.
I do it myself when there's a need to, if you're being encircled by people you want to repel.
Leave George alone. Do you know what? I come out of Hampden Park one night and I'd had a couple and I was lost. And I said to this guy, excuse me, can you tell me where Renfrew is? And his eyes looked at me like this, all glazed over, and he said, you English? Yeah, and he went, right, there's an Englishman here, by the way. Right, and he went, suddenly being famous is good. He went, I know you, by the way. I know you. You're Andy Gray, the footballer. So again, to save my life, Basra and now Glasgow. Are you right there? And he followed me all night. I had to be Andy Gray all night. Yeah, so Dad met Mum, 16 she was. And Dad was in the Royal Artillery. I always remember my mum saying, he said, I'll come and pick you up at home. No, please don't. She was so ashamed because they didn't have any money and nothing. And so he knocked at the door and he came in and he noticed how poor they were. And the next day he came back with a big load of meat and a bag of coal. He'd sold all his clothes. He only had was his uniform left. He pawned his uniform and got us some clothes. And that was the start of the Davidson family, I think.
Oh, amazing.
He was a good man, long dead now.
Jim, how does a man from that background become a Tory like you?
It's a very good reason. And I think, dare I say this, I wasn't very well educated until I grew older, and then my life became the university of life became. I had to learn quick about things. And I think I wasn't. I was a big Labour man, because I thought working class, Labour. My brother-in-law was a docker, etc., etc. And all the Cockneys, or the South East Londoners where I were all basically London. I grew up in a council house. Two things happened. My mum asked if we could buy the council house. I won New Faces in 1976, and I bought that council house for her. And that made a lot to me, that the mother and father died as house owners. They both died in that house. I was born in it.
You know, Greta Garbo once was asked, you used to be big in the movies, and she said, I'm still big, it's the movies that got small. You were really big in British television and winning all these competitions, and you won Celebrity Big Brother and so on. Have you just kind of put your career on the back burner for your charity work, or if somebody came along tomorrow and offered you a Saturday night variety show?
Bite their arm off, George, and bring it here for you. No, I think in my business you have a shelf life, and you must be happy with your lot. I was Ann Deck. I have friends now that were big-ish, who are fed up and miserable. Why aren't I on the television anymore? Why can't I get on? I'm funnier than Michael McIntyre, I'm this and that. No, it doesn't work like that. You have a shelf life. And I think your audience decide when you retire. They leave you a row at a time. Instead of playing to 1,000 people that year, you go back the next year and there's 800. And then there's 600. And you think, ooh, you know, it's time to sit back a little bit.
Or is it perhaps because your comedy is known for its controversial jokes about women and minorities.
Well, I don't think women and minorities are controversial. I think they're all the same.
Well,
I think by saying it's controversial to take ethnic minorities and women out the frame, as long as it's funny and courteous, as long as it's not insulting. Unfortunately, you get judged by people who've never seen you. They judge you on perception.
Yeah.
You know, that's why people like you, and if I may say it myself, can wrong foot people when you meet them. They oh, I don't know what all the fuss was about.
Jim, you defended me, and I've always defended you. And you're defending the soldiers that are sent into battles. However inglorious the battles, the people who are sent into them need to be defended. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Sputnik.
Thank you.
And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, obviously, we don't have much time left because we've had this fantastic interview with Jim Davidson. And so, keeping up with the topic on why the soldiers receive such poor care after returning, Jude answers, because they are expendable. Politicians are more interested in how much they can make from war than the reasons for it and the effect it could have on the people on the ground fighting it. That's all the time we've got for the tweets today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today, or on Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.